Well, good morning. This is Stan in Gainesville, Florida, and you are listening to Light Talk.
Hi, this is Steve in Dallas, Texas, and today we are interviewing lighting and projections designer Driscoll Otto on Light Talk.
And this is David in Long Beach, California. And if you don't already know, you are listening to Light Talk, and we are the Lumen Brothers.
Yes, we are.
We are.
Lumen humans.
We're Lumen humans. So anyway, so today we have a great show for you. But before we get started, Steve, why don't you tell us a little bit about Chicago? You guys just got back yesterday.
It sucked. It was cold. It was colder in Chicago than the surface of Mars. Wow. Let me just say that one more time. I could have been on the planet Mars, and it would have been warmer than walking down the streets of Chicago.
Wow.
You know, if you cast your mind back when you were a little David, you probably went down to the beach and you watched little sandpipers go to the ocean, then be chased back by the ocean water.
Waves, right?
They would run back and forth.
Right.
So I step outside and I run immediately back into the hotel. I didn't leave the darn hotel. And it's getting colder next week. Next week they're talking about 30 below zero.
Oh, my God.
It was brisk. For me, it was 20 below zero, so it wasn't so bad.
I'm telling you, I work in some of the coldest places on earth, but nothing's colder than Chicago in January. Nothing. I'm sorry. Norway was nothing. I mean, it was like a day in the Riviera compared to Chicago in January. So, but did you see any good students? Were there a lot of good students there?
I did. There were a lot of good students there. There were some interesting students. This year, URTA reached out, and I think they had sponsorships this year. Robe was there showing their equipment.
Oh.
Vectorworks was there. There were a couple regional theaters there recruiting. So, yeah, they're kind of expanding what URTA is, I think.
Well, that's really interesting. That's great. So, and how was the hotel? Because it was newly renovated, the Palmer House, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's still what it is.
No.
Yeah.
Was the food good? Was the food decent?
No.
Oh no. Oh no.
But it was so cold. I was just grateful to have food inside the hotel. The problem with the Palmer House is you have about a dozen really good restaurants all around it. So I mean, it's hard for a hotel to compete with that.
But you have to go outside.
Yes, you do have to go outside, and then there lays the problem again.
Well, glad to have you guys back. So
Good to be here.
Today we have a very special guest. And why don't you tell us a little bit about Driscoll?
Well, today we're going to welcome lighting and projections designer Driscoll Otto to the show. Originally from Texas, Driscoll has lived in New York City for the past 15 years. During that time, he has worked with some of the most exciting theater and opera artists in the world. He recently designed the projections for The Flying Dutchman at the Teatro de Maggio Musicale in Florence, Italy, and The Golden Cockerel at Santa Fe Opera. In 2015, Driscoll had his Metropolitan Opera debut with La Donna del Lago. Driscoll's work is seen quite frequently in regional opera and theater throughout the country. In 2015, Driscoll designed the lighting for the Colored Museum at the Huntington Theater Company, projections for Next to Normal at Baltimore Center Stage, and lighting for the Barber of Seville at Philadelphia Opera. Other companies that Driscoll has worked with include North Carolina Opera, Virginia Opera, Dallas Theater Center, Dallas Opera, Houston Shakespeare Festival, Trinity Repertory Theater, the Hangar Theater, Flat Rock Playhouse, Utah Festival Opera, and productions of Legally Blonde and Rock of Ages for Norwegian Cruise Lines. Driscoll earned his MFA from NYU's Tisch School of the Arts.
Wow. Driscoll, welcome to Light Talk.
Hey, guys.
For those who may have been listening for the last couple of episodes, Driscoll and I just did the show in Florence, Italy. And it was fantastic working with Driscoll, meeting him after all these years of hearing all about him from Paul Curran, about how great this guy was. And he is. I mean, and not only is he a great artist, I'm about ready to heap praises and embarrass you. Not only is he a great artist, but he's a great human being. And we just hit it off. A lot of people ask us, well, what is it like working with another lighting designer? All I can tell you is that I never see Driscoll's lighting design. I think of him as a colleague. And that just worked. It was just a wonderful situation and no stress. We laughed a lot together because it was crazy, man. It was just nuts. I think we went out for drinks one night. I said, man, you got to be on the show. We got to get you on the show. It's that simple. So here he is. And he was kind enough to take the time to spend an hour with us. So thanks a lot, Driscoll.
Yeah.
It's good to have you.
Yeah,
It's great to be here.
Driscoll.
And I have to say that there's nobody better to travel the world with than David. A true gentleman, a good time, good for jokes, and your work was amazing.
Oh, thank you, Driscoll. It was a great partnership. But Paul has a way of putting great teams together. I've been very fortunate, and I know you feel the same way, that we get to work with artists like Paul Curran, who basically gets the best team possible. And you've worked with him at the Met. I know we're going to talk a little bit about that, and also Santa Fe. But it was just a great, great, great experience. Now, you just got back from Virginia, right?
I'm about to go. I leave tomorrow.
Well, give Kyle my best,
I will.
Give him a big fat kiss from me.
I will.
So why don't we just get to these questions, okay?
Yeah.
Well, let me ask a question. So I've just read your bio,
Yeah.
so I guess this is a two-part question. Did I leave anything out? And part two of that question, talk about some of these highlights in your career that's really launched you to the next level.
The bio probably has a few additions to be made, but it's the one for my website, and I couldn't think of a better thing for you guys to read off. I will say that there have been a couple of directors that have sort of been the launching pads for me. I would say that almost at the same time of meeting Paul Curran, I met another opera director named Michael Schell. And Michael was hiring me as a lighting designer for opera, and Paul was hiring me as a projection designer for opera. And that sort of opened the doors to what has become a great part of my year each season. Lighting wise, I feel like some of the opportunities have come from opera also, but Billy Porter, the performer, a lot of people don't know, is an amazing director, and I have lit everything that Billy's done since 2008. And he's a dream to work with. He's brilliant, and people trust him. They give him big shows and they trust him, and that's allowed me to go to fun places.
Yeah, that's great when you find amazing collaborators like that. And it's funny. I just got out of my graduate lighting class, and again, for the 800th time, I said, make friends with directors. They're the ones who are going to be hiring you. Tell us a little bit about working on Donna del Lago. I mean, that was a show that you originally did at Santa Fe, right? And then moved to the Met.
Well, I'll start off with, yes, Santa Fe was the original producer of Donna del Lago. I was not involved. That production was the same scenic and costume design, but there were no projections because they opened up the back wall of Santa Fe's theater. So the audience got to witness the sunset over the gorgeous Santa Fe mountains. And while working on my first production with Paul, which was Baden-Baden at Gotham Chamber Opera, Paul was talking about this show that he had done at Santa Fe that was going to go to the Met. And I was sitting there going like, oh my goodness, that's amazing. I'm working with a director that's going to the Met. And I was like, oh, he'll never call me for that, but oh my goodness, that's amazing. And he, was talking about Dwayne Schuler, who is also one of the nicest human beings in the world.
Absolutely.
And, Dwayne had lit it and was going to light it again. And I'll say that I was at this small theater in Long Island called the Engelman, and Paul Facebook messages me. And he says, hey, what are you doing in 2015? Do you want to do a show with me? And I said, sure. And I waited like 2 weeks because I didn't want to seem, too antsy or, too eager. So I wrote him back on my way to LDI that year. And I said, hey, Paul, you mentioned a show in 2015. What is it, by the way? And he wrote back and he said, oh, it'll be La Donna del Lago at the Met. And I about dropped my phone at that point.
Oh, wow.
That's fantastic.
Just a small little theater up there in Manhattan.
Yeah. I was like, I just got the biggest job of my life over Facebook Messenger. So that's why I've never deleted my Facebook account.
The only reason.
Oh, well.
But, going into it, Paul said, what we had at Santa Fe was amazing. Obviously, we can't blow open the doors on 65th Street. And the view would be not very special. So he wanted me to, basically give the background that they had in Santa Fe, but not what they had in Santa Fe. In Santa Fe, they just had a sunset, which had nothing to do with the performance. Dramaturgically, it meant nothing other than, the back wall was open and it was gorgeous and it was a brilliant idea for that setting. But when we're going to add projections to it, the background should probably have something to do with the storytelling. And Paul tasked me with, thinking about sunrises and sunsets and, spooky forests and all of that. And I did, and I looked into it, and, I did the calculations, and I was going to be in the opera for about 2 hours. And the cost of getting stock footage for that amount of time was going to be astronomical, especially when, right after I got signed on to the project, they announced that it was going to be recorded onto a DVD and then broadcast for Met HD Live around the world. So that changes the licensing for a lot of this content.
Oh my God! Yeah, I can
so
imagine.
There was no way we were going to be able to afford buying these like great Scottish landscapes, for 2 hours long. Most of these things come in 30-second segments, anyways. And I probably could have done other researching, but I saw the opportunity to take a tiny crew. I had 2 people with me, and we flew to Scotland, and we went to the locations that were the settings of La Donna del Lago in Scotland, and we filmed sunrises and sunsets, getting up at 2 a.m. so that we could be on site by 4 at the latest, and standing in marsh up to our knees, in April, and we filmed this gorgeous footage. It was great. It was a wonderful experience. We had the opportunity to go to one distillery. We were only there for, I think, 4 days, and was not a lot of downtime, but we made sure to hit one whiskey distillery, Deanston. It was wonderful. And we got back, and that May, we went into our first tech, meaning it's pure tech. There's no singers, there's no orchestra. It's just the scenery, the lighting, and projections on stage, figuring out the show, making a pass at it. And I put up the imagery that we had settled on, the clips, and it became apparent very quickly that even though the set felt movie real when you were up next to it and looking at it, and without any projections it looked amazing, the moment I put these projections up, they were so vivid and so real, it made the set look fake. And so Paul was like, what do we do? So I asked my assistant, who was sitting next to me, I just said, hey, will you find a good daytime sky and just give me one still from it? And he did, and I took it into Photoshop, and I oil painted it, and then I put that up on the screen. And Paul said, oh my God, that's perfect. So then I said, okay, crap, how do I turn this film into an oil painting? So we took all of the footage, cut it all out into frames, so 30 frames a second, and brought 2 hours of that into Photoshop and did batch renders of hundreds of thousands of frames that were oil painted, and brought them out. And the oil painting plugin that we had was really good, but there were moments where a brushstroke would just like, from one frame to another wouldn't be fluid. So there was a lot of like going in and cleaning up and all of that, and rendering for days with, multiple Mac Pros just running hot.
Away.
Yeah. But ultimately we had these moving oil paintings, and it was fantastic. And it was, it was one of those things. I think almost every show I do with Paul, I get pushed a little bit further into a world that isn't necessarily my comfort zone, but I learn so much, and I'm able to bring something new to the table.
It sounds like there were 4 phone calls there. to your family. Hey, I just got hired to do a show at the Met. Hey, I'm going to Scotland. Hey, nothing works. And I'm a genius. I made it work.
Well, it's funny. Paul told me this story, years ago, and I said, "This guy's clever."
That's amazing what you've done with that.
Yeah, and I saw it on the Flying Dutchman too. I mean, your first round, these are ideas. These are great ideas. But then when you see it on this huge stage and huge screens, it's like maybe that ship is a little bit too literal, or maybe it's not magical enough, or maybe the movement needs to be different. And again, it's like being able to think quickly and come up with the technology to figure out how to make this work. And that leads us into our next question.
Well, I have a question. What do you see as the future of video projection technology?
Oh, goodness. I mean, I'm not necessarily the best person to answer this question. I can tell you what I see that I think is really interesting coming down the pipeline, but I'm sure there's people who have their head in the tech side of projection design way more than I do that would actually be able to tell us all the truth as to what's next. But we all talk about video mapping, and video mapping can be as simple as skewing some video on an angle so that it looks right on a wall, or it can be as much as taking a Gothic building and mapping every inch of it perfectly to where the gargoyles are and everything, and being able to project imagery that is not distorted and not skewed and, sort of pixel perfect to the shape of the building, so that you can you can basically replace the building if you want. And there are softwares coming out. There's actually a camera that works with projectors called LightForm that sends out a signal and records what it gets back, and it basically does a map of the building or picture or flowers or whatever, and then you can go in and you can put your content directly on all of this and make it look like a flower is constantly moving without anything shooting past a petal, without bleed anywhere. It's like perfectly on the petal, which allows it to look like it's a completely different object, right? We all know what it looks like when we just blast light or video it at something. When we see past it, our eye just says, oh, we're hitting it with this big idea. But when you are able to carve out every detail and follow the angles of that object, all of a sudden you give it completely different life. And I think that sort of camera is going to be the next step, right? Where we can walk into a room and just have a camera that does a lot of these readings and allows smaller budget shows to do video mapping in a way that giant budget shows are only able to do it now. Usually what it takes is a 3D scan of the room and the architecture or whatever you're doing to be able to get this point cloud that you then turn into your masks and all of that. But now cameras are able to do it just by shooting out light and grids and seeing and recording how those grids react and using that data to create the model.
That must take some major processing power to do that. I remember Gary told me about that last year, and it started out as a consumer. Wasn't this like a consumer type item that people were using?
Well, it is a consumer item to a certain extent. It's sort of playing both markets right now, and it's for me just an example. I think there are, Disguise right now has their OmniCal system, right, which is cameras that you put around when you're using Disguise / used to be known as D3. Which is both previs and media server all in one, 3D and all of that. And their OmniCal, will do the same sort of thing. It maps the room and allows you to have the 3D model of the room or the objects. But that's a much larger budget scale, right? This LightForm, you could take to a downtown theater in New York, attach it to your projector, and be able to do similar sort of features that you could with the OmniCal system. Granted, anybody listening that's an expert in OmniCal and all of that, I'm making broad generalizations.
That's right. We have a disclaimer at the end of the show, so you're protected.
Yeah, don't worry. We got the LED lawyers.
We need that disclaimer because we don't know what the hell we're talking about.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Talking from high tech to low tech, I think Steve's next question will address the low tech end of this.
Well, let's take a step backwards. And let's leave the Metropolitan Opera and the world of the future, and let's go back to Italy. Were there any technological problems there you had to overcome?
The first technological problem is a very, very, very old one, and it's people. It turns out that I think they don't do a lot of true video design in that building. But the next sort of thing that we fell into was their system, which was Watchout, which Watchout is a lovely, lovely media server. But they had an old version with old computers. So I was re-rendering everything to try to get rid of the hiccups. When a file would load, start running, or when a file would stop, I was just doing every trick that I've learned to try to get rid of the hiccups. And sadly, some of the stuff we were working with were larger files, and there was no, we got them scaled down as much as we could, but at a certain point I wasn't willing to risk quality. We did have a couple of little hiccups, I think, that kind of weren't always in the same spot, so it was hard to troubleshoot them. But I think for the most part it turned out okay. But the technology-wise, really they were about 5 years behind where we typically are here in the United States.
It was freaking gorgeous. I'm going to just tell everybody right now that it was, no one saw the hiccups except for us, you have to be looking for them. And it was, I guess the amazing part of the video design for me, from a collaborator, is just how connected it was with the music and the mood. There were moments that were just jaw-dropping. Just blew me away. Like when the first ship arrived, there's actually some video of this. I think it's on our Light Talk Facebook page. I think it's very, very effective. So,
well, thank you.
I've done so many shows in Italy now. I'm kind of used to some of the challenges, but I've never regretted it. I know Driscoll probably feels the same way, but it is a challenge. And also, you came over there, and if I remember correctly, Watchout was all in Italian, right? All the menus.
Oh, so that adds a difficulty factor of 7 to everything. Honestly, you didn't mention you were working in Italian.
Yeah, well, I forgot about that. Well, we actually got Watchout in English ultimately. What the hard part was dealing with the computer itself being in Italian, because I'm not necessarily a PC guy. I'm more of a Mac guy, and I'm trying to fumble my way into network settings and stuff just to do some file sharing.
Oh my God.
And everything was in Italian, and I found all of the tutorials or little documents telling me how to set it up properly, but I couldn't find any of these things in Italian. Ultimately, a IT gentleman from the Opera House showed up and allowed me to do file sharing, which expedited our process greatly, because I was no longer having to render to my computer, transfer to a hard drive, take the hard drive over to the PC, load from the PC, put it into Watchout, and then go and find the media within Watchout. That was quite a process, and we moved a lot faster once that was fixed.
You are listening to Light Talk with Steve, Stan, and David, the Lumen Brothers. And this week, Light Talk is sponsored by...
Are you designing a show in Italy, and not only do you not know or understand what the technicians are saying, but their coffee breaks happen at the most unusual times? And if you are gone getting coffee for yourself, when they return, they naturally assume that the call is over and the weekend has begun. What is an American theater artist to do? Well, Wamit's new USB-powered tech table Cappuccino machine will allow you to be present and juiced up for whenever the crew decides to return. The USB-powered tech table Cappuccino machine produces the frothiest cappuccino outside of any nearby Italian trattoria. Just plug it into your computer and the heady steam will tell you that it is ready to create succulent caffeinated nectar that is truly a glory to behold. Add the special Cuban attachment and enjoy some café con leche. Yes, your teeth will just rot from all the acidity and sugar in this Cuban delicacy. And coming soon, Wamit's new USB-powered tech table brioche oven. Bake your favorite Italian pastry while adding addicting sugarized froth into your coffee. So be your own barista with Wamit's new USB-powered tech table cappuccino machine, because you always need another gear.
And now, back to Light Talk.
So, Driscoll, I'm looking at your bio here, and I see that you did Legally Blonde and Rock of Ages for Norwegian cruise ships. Tell us about that. That just seems like that would be a monumental task.
First off, it was fun. Rock of Ages was the first one, so that was a huge learning curve for me. Fortunately, I was out there with some of the original collaborators from the Rock of Ages Broadway off-Broadway team. Zach Borovay, Marco Santana, Rai Mullis. Marcos and Rai were the associates and were putting the show up for the directors, and Zach was the original projection designer. I was lighting the show. And, you know, the crazy part is, one, we were teching the show in Germany. So the one benefit we had was that we were on a non-operating cruise ship. There was no being at sea, having patrons in and out of the venue during the day and having to work only at night. We had a true tech process, which was wonderful. But being in a foreign country and being on a brand new ship, you have issues like none of the set electrics have made it through customs yet. And we're about to have our, final dress rehearsal. Or you're a non-revenue generating entity on this ship, so you're sort of the lowest priority. And sometimes they want to test power, and they may not warn you, so you may be in the middle of a technical rehearsal, and all the power in the ship gets turned off. Or maybe just all the power in the theater. You never know. There are moments when they tell you that they're going to kill power for 15 hours, and you can either stay in your room, or you can leave the ship for that period of time, because the rooms are, you enter them with a key card. So if there's no electricity, you're not getting in your room. So, different shenanigans like that. But, by and by, I think I enjoyed the experience much more than I would have if we had been on an operating ship at that, because when the ships are in operation, a lot of times the work only happens at night, and that is not the world I want to live in at this point in my life. But, when we were working on Legally Blonde, the set got caught up in customs, I believe, also, and we were there for a week with no set. So the moving light programmer and I and the projection designer just started teching the show. The cast stayed in rehearsals, in their rehearsal room while we had no set. So we just, took video of the show and started designing it without any scenery, which is sort of difficult to do and definitely caused for notes once we got scenery. But yeah. And then a huge storm came, and they could not be attached to the dock anymore, because it's safer to be at sea during a big storm than it is on the dock, because you're not going to hit anything when you're at sea. So we then went out to rough waters for 24 hours where everybody was getting seasick. You could...
oh my God.
Yeah, it was... No. We would be in the dining area, and you would just see carts of things rolling from one side of the restaurant to another as some poor waiter would chase after them. It was fascinating. Yeah.
How long were you on these projects?
Both of them were about 3 to 4 weeks. Legally Blonde got extended a bit extended in the middle. We were supposed to go home at Christmas, and because there was no set for the first week we were there, the moving light programmer and I stayed over Christmas and used that time to catch up.
How do you feel about designing both lighting and projections? Do you prefer to do only one or both on the same production?
I typically prefer to do just one, unless it's a smaller show and I feel like it's, possible for me to do them equally. I actually don't mind doing both, but the hard part about doing both is that a lot of times theaters don't necessarily see is that means I need a really good associate in each department, because there will be times when I'm caught up with one and that we have to keep teching the other side also. And so, if it's a big show, it's really hard. It's hard for me to focus on both. That being said, having just finished Iolanta with Paul Curran in Chicago, it was not a small show, and I think we ended up with an amazing product, and I was able to do both, and I just sort of delegated my time as appropriately as I could. We dealt with mostly video notes during the day before we had cast, and then lighting when we did have cast, and but I typically would just want to do one at a time, because I think that I can bring more ideas to the table with just one, and if I have a good collaborator like a David here, then it's very easy to do just one and have good ideas that riff off each other.
Yeah.
So
I agree, man. It's great when you have that team. It really is great.
So I understand you've also begun teaching. Can you talk a little bit about your experiences in education? And I guess people want to know what your pedagogy is and what your style of teaching is.
I taught a semester at Fordham, and it was sort of a very loose class about, it was called the Cue and the Narrative, and it was really about getting students to connect the ideas they have together and have them all work with the bigger piece. Because a lot of times, what at least at that university they felt was that their students had really, really great ideas for moments, but they weren't really tying them together in the big picture very well. So the class was a lot about the ideas and transitions, because it seemed to be, once we started talking about it, that transitions were sort of one of the places they were lost on. So that was actually a really exciting class. It was all elements of cue design. So we had a sound section, a lighting section, a projection section, and then the final was all three together. I had a sound designer friend come in and do sort of the basics for sound, and then our project, Shipwrecked, was super exciting. I only allowed them to use Foley skills. There was no digital, no QLab, no anything. It was beating on tables or pouring water. It was really exciting. And I think that right there is sort of the way I like to approach education, which is a super hands-on, rough kind of idea. I want, when we do projection class, which I teach at Pace University, I want to start off with just the ideas. We always start off with still images on a project, and I want to see where they're coming from. I make them do storyboards and big research packets, and the research packets can be historical, they can be emotional, they can be things they would use in the show or just things that they react to. But I want to get to the bottom of where their ideas are coming from, and then we move on to how do we make those ideas happen. And I think that the basis is finding the idea. And I think that's the hard part. I think right now the generation that's coming up really wants to have everything sleek and done, and not look at the sort of rough, dirty version of it where really the inspiration sort of blossoms out of. Does that sort of answer the question?
Yeah, that's great. That was great.
Well,
Thank you.
you're talking about doing the hard work of being an artist.
Yes.
Being a collaborative artist. That's fantastic. Okay, so speaking of projects, what dream projects would you like to produce?
Oh, goodness. My thesis at NYU was the best little whorehouse in Texas. And I had to design the sets, the lighting, and have a sort of rough idea for the costumes. So because it's a paper project or a conceived project, it's never actualized. I'm dying to design that. I also would love to do both lighting and video for a Hedwig sometime. I think that would be a blast.
Yeah. That'd be a good show. That's great, man. We all have our dreams, and they usually come true, so hopefully they will for you.
If you're listening to this podcast, I would like to design the best little whorehouse in Texas and Hedwig.
So let's just do it. Come on, we get Paul. Paul would love to do whorehouse, I'm sure.
Oh, yeah, he would kill it, yeah.
Oh, man, let's do it.
Yeah.
Hey, so that pretty much takes care of our time, Driscoll. We'd like to thank today our special guest, Driscoll Otto, for joining us this morning on Light Talk with the Lumen Brothers. And I really hope that we have the opportunity to work together again, Driscoll.
Oh, me too.
Yeah, man, you're great. And thank you again for coming out and talking to us.
No problem.
Thank you for waking up early this morning for nothing. But yeah. Cool. Well, that Hammond organ solo in the background tells us that once again you've spent another morning listening to Light Talk. Check out our website on lighttalk.org for future guests, and be sure to follow us on Facebook and subscribe to our podcast on iTunes. That way you will not miss a second of Light Talk fun.
No guarantee is offered regarding the accuracy of any statements or opinions made on this podcast.
You see, Driscoll, you're safe now. We just had that disclaimer. We're okay.
And remember, if you choose to litigate, our solid state law firm of Cobb, Driver, and Array will defend us until our retirement funds are depleted.
Light Talk is written and produced by the Lumen Brothers, coming to you from Long Beach, Gainesville, and the Republic of Texas.
And be sure to tune in next week when we discuss, should I learn pyrotechnics? Do we have any favorite strip lights? Does this director really hate color in lights? And what am I, chopped liver?
All of that. And a new sponsor, Light Talk, broadcasting questionable Lumen knowledge and humor around the world.
So we'll see you all next Saturday morning. And Driscoll, thanks a lot. Say goodbye to our listeners. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
See ya.
Bye,
Bye,
Driscoll.
everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye, everybody.
Light Talk.